Hi, Juno News. Welcome back to another episode of Not Sorry. I'm Alexander Brown. I'm director of the National Citizens Coalition. I'm a writer, campaigner, a columnist. Thrilled to have you here. And while you are here, I want you to take advantage of our subscription discount. If you click right here, that's junonews.com/not sorry for 20% off. Brian Lilley joins the show today. Great guest. Big fan of his work. He's a terrific columnist. He's got a new website, brianlilley.com, where he's doing some great work on Substack. We have a lot to talk about because these false starts, these failures to launch, they are mounting, for the federal government. We've heard all this wonderful talk that things are getting better, but if you're like me, if you follow the work here on Juno News, if you're up to date, if you see the trend lines going in this direction, you know that things aren't getting a whole lot better. The prime minister is back overseas right now, meeting with ostensibly his left-wing pals, and our press is asking him, just what exactly are you accomplishing right now at this moment of multiple domestic crises? And I want you to listen to whatever this word salad response is.
You've mentioned both in New York and London, and in recent days you've been meeting with lots of business leaders and CEOs. For the most part, we don't know who those people are. Can you tell us who those people are? And will you commit that your office share who you meet with at a business level like this?
Yeah, I think we share broad. It's a good question. Actually, don't know what we share, to be honest. I mean, how's that for an honest answer?
Can you tell us a few of the people you've met?
We met today with a number of infrastructure type investors.
I know how I sound when I'm lying, or when I'm spinning, or when I'm stalling for time and grasping at straws and looking for the exits, and it's a lot like that. And this is a moment where key immigration issues persist, where key crime and chaos issues persist, where inflation is rampant, unemployment. The Canadian voter is, some of them are realizing, evidently by the polls, where the Conservatives are now leading in Angus Reid, are realizing that, once elbows up recedes, this percentage of the population who maybe fell for the very worst of it and some of the unhelpful rhetoric, that we're still left with all these issues, and that these issues should have been, top of mind the whole time. They never should have. Our domestic self-inflicted liberal crises should have always stayed at the tippity top of concerns, and concerns so big that we have a interim parliamentary budget officer making an unprecedented statement last week, raising the alarm unlike I've ever seen. When we talked to Brian Lilley, I know that he's mentioned that he's never seen language like this. He's sounding the alarm, not just by saying, this is unsustainable. He's saying this is stupefying. He's saying our deficit, if we don't get it in control, this is over. I've never seen language like that. If an esteemed professional is being that hyperbolic, that tells you that it's, kind of a big issue. And so take a look at this clip.
How alarming is that for the average Canadian, for the taxpayer? Because there is only one taxpayer, right?
It should be very alarming, right? These are, I don't know, I think I use the words in French, which the translators probably got really well, like stupefying, shocking, right? This is not, like, it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done.
If you don't change, this is done. And I think we all feel that. If you're a part of this audience, you know how difficult things are out there right now. You know how much we've seemingly lost as a country and need to get back. So join Brian and I for this chat. Let's talk a little common sense, holding the Liberals to account and making sense of these false starts. And do take advantage of that promo code at junonews.com/not sorry. Brian Lilley joins the show now here on Juno News. Brian, famed political columnist for the Toronto Sun, show host, has a terrific new Substack at brianlilley.com. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Brian, you just wrote, I was just reading it this morning, on Carney's UK trip, where, it's seeming a little bit like a sham. Well, there's all these domestic crises happening at home. You mentioned that we see him meeting with Keir Starmer again. We see him meeting with the Australian PM, the Spanish PM, Iceland's PM, and I will not try to pronounce her name. But we don't see any deliverables. At a news conference touting all his great work, he was asked about all these business leaders he's meeting with, and the answer was clearly a struggle for him to say anything of substance, as is becoming the norm. What is your concern here as he's overseas with all these issues at hand, and why are we not seeing deliverables from this trip and potentially others?
So my issue isn't that he was out of the country, that he was meeting with foreign leaders. I'd like him to do that. That is a part of the job. But you need to deliver something on it. And, I was seeing people on X and elsewhere complain, oh, he's out of the country again. He doesn't like Canada. And I'm thinking, well, if we want to expand our trading ties, if we want to actually be successful at that, he's got to leave the country. And he's got to focus on signing trade deals, significant ones, or improving them. But then I was looking as his itinerary would come out. And I was like, wait a minute, there's no there. I mean, just the other day, I was defending this trip on Warren Kinsella's podcast, saying, well, this is good. Let him do it, but he's got to deliver. Well, how is he going to deliver when the bulk of what he was there for is something called the Global Progress Summit? This is a meeting of left-wing national leaders and politicos from around the world, and it's put on by a group called the Center for American Progress. That's a Democrat-linked left-wing think tank out of Washington, D.C., whose day in, day out work is trying to take down Donald Trump. I mean, this makes no sense. The people on the board, the top leaders of it, have all worked for Obama or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. They've recently worked against Donald Trump and put out papers every day denouncing the president. You don't have to like Donald Trump either, but we're in the middle of trying to get a deal with this guy. And you're going to spend your time at a summit put on by people who are opposed to him and his very existence? That makes no sense to me. Plus, can you imagine if Stephen Harper went to the International Democratic Union and described it as a chance to protect Canadian workers? The news release that Carney's office put out on this was all about how this was to build the Canadian economy, protect Canadian workers, and drum up business. He had a business breakfast on Saturday morning. Then he went to the Women's Rugby World Cup to cheer on Canada. Look, if he's there already, that's great. But if that and going to the Global Progress Summit are the reason he's there, I'm sorry, those are party or personal events. That's not you drumming up business. The news release had the Global Progress Summit as a kind of an add-on. Oh, and he'll also do this. No, that is the bulk of what he did. All those leaders that you mentioned are all left-wing political leaders that were there for the summit as well to talk about how to fight against the right.
And I know that hearing from my audience this morning, the Juno audience, like their concerns right now, of course, we want to be expanding ourselves. And speaking to our foreign allies, I mean, I have similar thoughts about that conference, but coming into the weekend, people were going into the weekend, were really alarmed to see the words of the interim PBO, to really dramatic language, unlike which I've ever seen before. Stupefying. The claim that if we don't get this under control, this is over. Not we're in trouble here.
Alex,
This is over.
I've been covering the PBO since Stephen Harper introduced it after the 2006 election. I've never heard a PBO use words like this. Kevin Page in his early days was sometimes co-opted by the opposition and said things that were rather partisan, but I never remember language like this to describe the fiscal situation. And so sure, if you're going on this mission to drum up business that's going to boost the economy and make it so that deficit isn't as big because the government's getting more revenue because the economy's bigger, great. But that's not happening. And meanwhile, we've still got an unsustainable fiscal situation.
Unsustainable fiscal situation, more reporting that our real GDP per capita flatlined while the U.S. economy surges. If I'm not mistaken, it's like 6 straight years since we've seen any growth there. And if you're a regular person right now, maybe you went all in on elbows up. Maybe understandably you were worried about some of the 51st state rhetoric. I think we're seeing in the polls that the rubber isn't quite meeting the road with some of those promises, and this trickle back to the reality that if Trump is not the number one priority in Canadian polling, we are reminded of how difficult things are. That people are worried about crime, they're worried about cost of living, they're worried about unemployment, and if they're not going to get elbows up right, and you've covered it, so fantastically, I'm curious, like, do you see the air coming out of the balloon here with their start, where because these results are not coming quickly, this in some ways is going to provide a real opportunity for the Conservatives to get their groove back?
Well, I know most in the media like to point to Nano's polling showing that the Conservatives are well back. Abacus has never found that. They've always had the Conservatives a couple points behind or tied. Angus Reid poll last week had the Conservatives ahead by 3, 41-38. So look, I think it's still competitive. Depending on what the ballot question is, you're into a resume contest, and that's part of why Mark Carney won. It's like, oh, we've got economic problems. There's a banker. There's an economist, but he's not delivering. There's an old movie from the 80s called About Last Night, and Rob Lowe's this young guy asking Jim Belushi, the brother of the late John Belushi, he's asking him about this event that happened with this woman last night. He keeps asking, is she a pro? Is she a pro? And the line that Belushi keeps giving back to Lowe is, at this point, we don't know. And that, I feel like that is me talking about Mark Carney. Oh, is he going to do this? He's going to do that. At this point, we don't know, because there's a lot of talk. There's not a lot of action. What are the deliverables? He can point to some things, and they clearly have. Yet they did the middle class tax cut. They lowered the consumer carbon tax rate to 0, but food inflation is still going up. Unemployment is still rampantly high. People are complaining that their kids can't find a job because of all the temporary foreign workers. There's a woman in my building complaining to me. She's an immigrant herself, complaining that her kids, so she's employed, but her kids can't find a job, and she's worried about her kids, and she's blaming the temporary foreign worker program. This is someone that was supportive of Carney and now saying, well, wait a minute, what is going on here? So look, there's lots of opportunity for air to come out if he doesn't deliver. And that major projects list announcement that he had, that was an incredibly tepid and weak affair. I'm sorry, those projects were all going ahead with or without being on the major projects list. I mean, the copper mine in Saskatchewan was pretty much near completion. I think it'll be done next year. So, he promised to think big, act bigger, move at speeds not seen in generations. I didn't vote for Mark Carney. I did not write columns cheerleading for him, but he is the prime minister. And if I want the economy to succeed, I need him to succeed. We're not going to do that with what he's doing so far. He's not living up to his own words. And I think if that continues and people don't see real action by early in the new year, by Christmas or just after that, it's going to be like a pin going into a balloon.
Yeah, and I feel the same, and particularly on major projects where your reporting's been terrific and your writing, where it's taking credit for all these projects that were already well underway. I work in the conservative third-party space, so I'm a small C conservative. I'm the director of the National Citizens Coalition. Yeah. I'm thrilled to talk to the Juno audience. I contribute on some projects like Project Ontario. I want to be wrong about this start. Like I'm rooting for my prime minister. I'm not wearing the blue jersey, as you can see. I'm wearing green today. I would be thrilled if this looked a lot more like 2014 than the absolute heart of those terrible Trudeau years. But these concerns are mounting, and one of the ones that is really troubling people, and you talk to the industry experts, you talk to MPs, is they are claiming to be getting it together on immigration. We know generationally what a problem this has become. Talking to that lady in your building, what a problem this has become. I talk to young men all the time in my sphere, young women working in the job market right now. They're sending out hundreds of resumes that are instead going to temporary foreign workers, seemingly, or those who came here through the International Mobility Program. And there is new reporting today, or going into this weekend, that Canada is failing to count how many migrants are even overstaying their visas. We are apparently conducting exit tracking, so when you leave, your passport is getting flagged in the system. But refusing to share these numbers publicly tells us, and we could all assume that this was going on, that there is a significant amount who are staying here illegally. We have, in the next few years, 4.9 million temporary visas coming up. Given the level of outright fraud that's taken place from some of these scummy colleges to these LMIA postings that don't pass the smell test, what would be your concern there? That if we're failing to release to the public how many migrants are overstaying their welcome, like, how bad might this number actually be?
It'll be staggering, could be in the millions. Look, we've taken an immigration system that under successive liberal and conservative governments was seen as a model. Other countries would study it for what to do. If they were to study it today, it would be what not to do. And let me put this in perspective. This is not good for anyone involved in this situation. Unless we just want declining living standards and a harder life, this is not good for anyone, because it has put a strain on the housing stock in this country. It is putting a strain on the healthcare system. It's putting a strain on a lot of things when you bring in people faster than you can house them, get them healthcare, find them jobs. When my parents came to Canada in 1968, it took them 5 years to be able to save up and buy a home. And they were young. They were in their early 20s when they came, and they started having kids. My older brother was born not long after they got here. So, growing family, lots of expenses. They were able to make a decent living, save enough money to buy a nice, modest, middle-class suburban home. You can't do that now. And you can't do that if you are one of the newcomers coming in, unless it's, the whole multi-generational family pooling resources, or the village back home sending money. You can't do that if you're the newcomer. You can't do that if you are a Canadian kid born and raised here. We've made things unaffordable. The knock-on effects are so vast, and I'm not sure how they're going to clean it up, or if they even have the will to clean it up. You'll recall that former Immigration Minister Mark Miller was at one point saying, well, the way to get down from 7.2% of our population being temporary residents is make a whole bunch of them permanent residents. We shouldn't be making temporary foreign workers a path to citizenship. We shouldn't be giving people backdoor entry into the country. That's what we're doing with the asylum system. In 2014, I believe it was, there were 16,000 people who came to Canada and declared asylum. These are not people who came from UN refugee camps and the like. These are people who showed up at our door, at our airports, at our border somewhere, and declared asylum. 16,000, and there was a 10,000 person backlog. The most recent statistics we have for last year, 190,000 people declared asylum, and that was down from the year before. And the number of people waiting for their hearing is almost 300,000. That's a broken system, but it's being seen as a backdoor entry into Canada because they've incentivized people to come. They're not going to enforce things. You get a work permit right away. You get a bunch of money to help you set up your home. You maybe have your home paid for with a hotel or a shelter. This is destroying the system that was there. And so I have no hope that they're going to deal with that 4.9 million people. I think an awful lot of them are going to stay, and the current government will not have the will to or the competence to go in there and deal with this.
I hope you're wrong about that. Looking at those recent numbers too, I believe it's now 1 in every 83 people in Canada are products of that just broken asylum stream, where we have students just who are studying, business management at a school like, say, a Conestoga, who it's coming up all of a sudden, oh, I can't go home, even though they're going home for vacation. They're going home to visit the family. But now it's these fraudulent, evidently hundreds of thousands of fraudulent asylum claims.
And we were also causing problems for the Americans, because suddenly we had 10,000 Indian nationals from Canada going across the border and declaring asylum. So they're in Canada on a visa that allows them entry into the United States. Then they go to the States and declare asylum. Why? Because they're just trying to use all of this system as backdoor entry into either Canada or the US. We clearly need to clean that up. They're tinkering on the edges. I don't see them doing the heavy lifting that's needed.
You're an active guy on the digital channels too. You're driving millions of engagements a month. Like, when I go on even to just my Instagram reels now, you open it and you actually just see immigration fraudsters, like just putting out messages being like, I'll mule you across the border. Hey, fellow Punjabi guys who came here since 2020, just to hop in the truck. Like it is on Front Street. We're not even trying to hide it. And that the new immigration minister is off to such a poor start, fumbling her words in the House, not inspiring much confidence. They can say that they're lowering that PR number a little bit. You can see, at least in the case of the province of Ontario, they are starting to, put the boot to the career colleges to some extent, as well as the fraudulent trucking industry, where now hundreds of guys are being pulled off the roads for these shoddy licenses. But unless you really cut into that 4.9 million, if we think we have record youth unemployment now, I can't even imagine how bad it's going to be in the next few years.
Yeah, well, 15 to Alberta was at 20% youth unemployment 2 months ago. It only fell to 17% because people stopped looking for work. That's how bad it is right now. So getting worse is not a good option.
Getting worse is not a good option. We're seeing, getting worse with all these issues is not a good option. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing from what is seemingly a Carney false start. Brian Lilley, thank you for joining us today. Everyone check out his work at the Toronto Sun and at brianlilley.com.
Thanks so much, Alex.